Sit comfortably. You can do zazen. You can do, you can watch. We're going to begin by watching being mindful of our breathing to sort of, I think of it sequentially like this, sort of getting deeper and deeper. And the breathing meditation is practiced in the Mahayana also, but not predominantly as it is in, say, some of the modern Theravada practices. So relax yourself. Put your attention on this and let go of other concerns. Just watch the breathing and recognize when you're breathing in and out. And if you want to add that extra tension, count the breaths. As always, at the beginning, you may notice your mind kind of multitasking, trying to watch the breath, but still attending to other thoughts. Try to let go of those other preoccupations. Even though you may be watching the breathing, mindful of it while it's coming in and going out, but at the end points, when it's static for a moment, your mind try to multitask again. So try to watch the whole process. And then as before, watch one of the inhalations as it imagine going up to the crown of your head, down to your heart chakra area, and place your attention on the mental consciousness. That first recognized by its contents, the thoughts. Recognizing the nature of the consciousness, the clear light nature, within which the thoughts are arising, from which it's emerging. The mental consciousness experience is one in which you recognize through experience that not following the thoughts, not focusing on the contents of the mind, the objects, that they begin to diminish in their intensity, maybe fading out for a while, and then even if they emerge again, the frequency within which those thought patterns arise becomes less frequent. Well, we can learn from that by not following anger and attachment and jealousy and depression, they can begin to fade and become less frequent. This clarity of the mind, conventional mind, is what's called the conventional clear light nature, conventional Buddha potential. Rejoicing in being able to recognize it now is due to the fact that we have a life of leisure and endowment, interest in Buddhism, some enthusiasm to practice, aspiration to become better. All good uses of a perfect human rebirth, but rather than wasting it on accumulating stability of the 8 worldly concerns, the 8 worldly dharmas, rather than being concerned with the appearances of this life alone, wanting to achieve, first of all, our own welfare, everlasting happiness of nirvana. But when we turn our mind to the plight of others, on the basis of recognizing our own suffering and our equality with others, recognizing their kindness as having been our mother, numberless lives in the past, developing a responsibility to repay their kindness. But we can't really repay it in a deep way unless we ourselves evolve and become more enlightened. We can't lead higher beings to their goal unless we become enlightened. So with that thought, that motivation, wanting to achieve enlightenment, to be able to help our mother sentient beings, and understanding that the practices involved in that depend on understanding the Buddha's teachings, his sequential staircase-like leading of beings from more gross understandings to finer understandings. I think I'm going to listen to the teaching, participate today on the teaching on tenets, talk about tenets, in order to further my spiritual development for the welfare of others. That's my goal in listening, participating. I'm going to participate in order to become a Buddha, an enlightened being for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. How do my eyes look? I can't tell. I just had eye examination yesterday, and doctor said I have something called vitiliform macular dystrophy, not muscular dystrophy, muscular. I'm just losing my eyesight slowly. So you had a better picture there a minute ago of Manjushri, the interpretive Manjushri. As I mentioned before, the definitive Manjushri is the exalted wisdom of emptiness. The similar with Avalokiteshvara, Tibetans say Chenrezi. The definitive Chenrezi is great compassion, the Buddha's great compassion. The interpretive Chenrezi is four-arm or two-arm or thousand-arm Avalokiteshvara. Likewise, Tara, definitive Tara, is the enlightened activity of all of the Buddhas. Often, although Tara has various varieties, white, green, so forth, yellow, enlightened activity is also often associated with the color associated with a Mogasiddhi green, so green Tara. The definitive Vajrapani, I think, is the power of the Buddha's mind. And so the interpretive Vajrapani is, deities that exemplify that kind of power. So here we're praising the definitive Manjushri and likewise the interpretive form of Manjushri as the Bodhisattva. So the verse, homage to my guru and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart the scripture symbolic of seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like the sun unclouded by the two obscurations, who with compassion like a father for his only child teaches with 60-fold eloquence all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance, overwhelmed by suffering. You whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wields wisdom's sword that vanquishes the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, who have finished the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments. O Manjushri, to you I bow. Please dispel the darkness of my mind. And as before, we'll say the mantra together. Om Marabazanari, 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 Om Marabazanari. Thank you. So, how are we doing? Any questions, thoughts, comments? I see some more people there. Rowena.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wherever you are.
Wherever I am.
I was wondering this, when the Mind Only School is talking about this background condition, if they're thinking in terms of karma, they say there's there's stuff coming towards you that you're interpreting. Am I getting this right?
Okay, I'm not quite sure what you're thinking. The background, what are you talking about? The background?
Let me see, I should have written it down better. The idea that there are objects out there that are sort of suggesting what they are to you as you are engaging in them. Is that how that happens?
That's the opposite of what they're saying.
Okay,
They're saying that there aren't objects. Yeah, so, yeah, but you're getting there. It's that there are not the Chittamatra or the Vijnapti what's that? Vijnapti Matra or Yogacara. They're all names that can cover that, although sometimes the different names indicate certain tenets that they hold. They general quality is that they don't accept the existence of outer objects out there that are presenting themselves to you, as all of the other schools, other than those that follow some Chittamatra ideas like the Yogacara, Svatantrika, Madhyamakas, everyone else accepts for the most part that there is the existence of outer objects. Their status may be different, like in Prasangika, they don't exist the way that they appear, but they're still existing as outer objects, we say. Chittamatra says that there are not outer objects presenting themselves to one, that the appearance of such arises because of karmic seeds on our consciousness. And if you go into detail, there are different views of how many consciousnesses there are. Sometimes the famous proposition of Chittamatra is that we have a consciousness called the storehouse consciousness, the Alaya Vijnana, or Tibetan Kunshi. And it's within that the karmic imprints from past, and we're making imprints now, seeds are planted. Those seeds, when they ripen, at the same time that the appearance of an object as an external object arises, the corresponding subject consciousness that's recognizing it, that they arise together simultaneously. So that's one of the senses of mind only.
Okay. Venerable George.
I'll go to, even though Donnie had her hand up, I mentioned that, and we'll go back to Donnie in a second, but Bob wanted to add something. Maybe I made some mistake here, something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that Rowena was talking about karma, and karma is actually a huge motivation for the Chittamatra point of view, because if you take the view that everything that we experience comes from our karma, even the type of external world that we experience and the type of things that happen, if our world is not external, but is created by our imprints on our mind, then that would be one mechanism for how all of our karma can manifest in the external world. And they even talk about that, for example, the famous example of a glass of water. For us, we see it as a glass of water, whereas a hungry ghost would see it as pus and so forth. But if everything is ripening as potentials on our mind, then that provides a mechanism for karma to operate in the external world. So it's sort of an interesting idea. But I think there is so I think when Rowena was talking about karma with the Chittamatra, I think there is some sense of that with them.
Oh, is that what you were saying? That's much more sophisticated, Rowena, than I was attributing to you. That's wow, that's pretty deep. Yeah. So there is this problem that's addressed in the Madhyamaka and especially Prasangika in a different way. How, a glass of water to us appears as water, to a fish appears as an abode, an aquatic animal, to the desire realm gods appears as ambrosia, and the hungry ghosts have so much obscuration that it appears as pus and blood. So if the Chittamatra argues that if external world existed as a different entity from the mind, that this would be problematic. How's these different beings in different realms viewing the same object? Because you could hold up the water, and there are incidences in the sutras when Shariputra and Mahamoggallana were talking about the Dharma, and a Preta came and they offered water, and the Preta said that the Preta only perceived pus and blood. So it's not just a theory. Supposedly that's what they actually perceive. Prasangika has a very deep explanation of that we'll talk about later, but that's one of the arguments that Chittamatra uses. Of course, they have many arguments why things are mind only, but that's one of them. So good, okay.
Thank you.
So Donnie, you can take your hand down. Now it's your chance.
Oh, okay. This is from that Cosort book, and it's on the scripture.
Oh, on the Tenets book, Cosart,
Yeah.
and someone, forgot who it was.
Okay, so it's a footnote. There are 5 lineages, the 3 vehicles, one whose lineage is indefinite and one who fails. This is the only Mahayana school to say that there are some who cannot be liberated. Okay, could you expand on who are those who cannot be liberated?
Okay, I'm not sure that's the only school that says, I think some Vaibhashikas also accept that.
Okay.
Generally we say that we have a predisposition for the practice of Buddhism, some kind of lineage or family. In some, from a higher point of view, these lineages can change, but some of the schools say that our lineages can be definite, that we are definite to practice the Shravakayana, so the Shravaka lineage. So Shravakayana and Shravaka lineage are different. Lineage means something within you. Like when we talk about Buddha potential, another name for that is Buddha lineage.
That sounds awful lot like predestination.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah. So
okay.
there are some that are saying, sorry. There are some that
I
are
was saying I don't like it. No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't like it either. Predestination. Come on. From Prasangika point of view, we all have the Buddha potential. We do have temporary lineages that are enhanced. That is our predisposition. Our desire to follow one path that's enhanced because of teachings and perhaps karmic imprints from previous lives. So we may be of a hearer lineage for a certain time, so that we sort of, it's kind of like almost like being Republican and Democrat today. You sort of don't like to hear about the practices of the Bodhisattvas or the Pratyeka Buddhas, so you're aiming for that goal. And there are some schools, this particular, I think you were mentioning here in the Chittamatra, some say that there are some who have no lineage.
Okay, who would be an example of that? That almost sounds like the caste system.
Yeah, it does sound
You're
like
not
this.
allowed.
So we don't, you shouldn't think that that's the general Buddhists, everyone agrees with that. There's
Oh,
some
I
people-
don't. I'm just arguing about
I'm glad to
this.
hear that. Okay. So say, for instance, in the Vaibhashikas, we can talk about someone whose roots of virtue are cut off. That means they've become so bad over some period of time that they can't create virtue again. They can't develop virtuous states of mind. That's a little bit like someone who has lost their lineage. Some of the Vaibhashikas go to the extreme of saying, once it's cut off, it can't be regained. So it's though they can't achieve liberation. They don't talk so much about the Bodhisattva path. It's the rare individual who, for the Vaibhashikas, who practices the Bodhisattva path, but they say that some people are destined never to go any further. So that's a little bit similar to this particular idea of some who have lost their lineage, or is what is this, it failed or something like that.
Thank you. That's what I thought it was. Just checking to see what you thought. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So here we talk
George.
about, they're different. Yeah, Kevin, I see your hand up.
I was just going to add,
Your
so this is
metaphorical hand. 1 second. So here, when we're talking about these lineages in the Chittamatra, they're different. You know, the followers of scripture and the followers of reasoning have slightly different ideas. Some say that there are definite lineages, and that is, you know, that you will definitely go to the hearer's practice the hearer's path and the solitary realizer's path, the Bodhisattva path. Some say that it is definitely changeable, and those that say that it's changeable generally agree that there's one final goal, one final vehicle. So we say Eka Yana. Eka means one. Yana means vehicle, like Mahayana, Hinayana. And that even if you, so that Ekayana idea is that even if you have a temporary lineage to achieve or to practice the Shravaka path, when you achieve that nirvana, your mind stream is not severed. They take the idea of nirvana, the ni prefix, which usually is like a negative particle, to mean not that the consciousness is snuffed out, which some of the lower schools generally say that's the case. When you achieve nirvana in that lifetime, you still have a consciousness, but when you die, your consciousness does not continue. Those of the Chittamatra who now the Mahayana says that the mind stream is not snuffed out. Even the hearers and solitary realizers, when they achieve their arhatship, their nirvana, what is snuffed out is the mind of grasping for another life, the ignorance that impels you into samsara, and your mind remains in a meditative equipoise on emptiness, their emptiness, this lack of duality between subject and object, or that names and concepts do not characteristically adhere into the objects that they're labeled with. When you slowly, after a long period of time, that samadhi on emptiness diminishes, and at that time, the Buddhas awaken them from that through the Buddhist powers and remind them that they have not achieved the ultimate goal, and they are encouraged and eventually enter into taking rebirth again, not due to uncontrolled karma and delusion, but by by prayer causing their karmic instincts, still karma that's on their mind stream, to be activated. They take rebirth. They spend a long time developing bodhicitta. They've already realized emptiness, but it takes them a long time to develop bodhicitta because it's something that they had neglected before. And they do eventually become Buddhas. So there's one final vehicle, the Buddha vehicle. So there are different views in the Chittamatra, followers of scripture and followers of reasoning. So Kevin, where's Kevin?
Yeah, I was going to say, I
Oh, there you
understood that we have habitual patterns that go with us from one lifetime to another. If our habitual pattern is to be Hinayana, it's going to be very difficult in each lifetime to actually break that pattern.
Yeah, I think that's generally the case. It's what when we talk about various qualities, let's say positive quality of wisdom, at birth, we may have, because of having cultivated wisdom in the past, admired it, worked to develop it, and so forth, we have what is a certain activation of wisdom called innate wisdom. It's kind of like you say, the predisposition, the karmic residue of having practiced that and admired it and activated it in the past. And then there are other kinds of wisdom that are developed during a lifetime due to effort, which even if you don't have the innate wisdom, you can develop wisdom because of some karmic instincts in your mind. You hear the teachings, you're encouraged to develop it. I told a story once before of this one nun when Geshe Darge was teaching. We would do meditation on emptiness, and she asked Geshe, when I meditate on emptiness, my mind is just blank. It's just like I can't, nothing happens. I can't get any understanding. And Geshe said, that's because you didn't familiarize yourself with this in the past. So that innate kind of wisdom, or that innate quality of admiring the Hinayana, all of these different things, there's a certain momentum from the past, but that doesn't necessarily determine you completely. You can change that in any one lifetime. Okay, so enough of that. Any other? Oh, Bob has another question. Observation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit uncomfortable when people start talking about when people become arhats or whatever, and that their consciousness is severed, because that's not what I've always understood it to mean is that their connection with samsara is severed, but that they have some kind of continued existence in nirvana, but it's a completely different existence than anything exists in samsara, so we can't describe it. But I think it's the sort of thing that for the Theravadins, you don't pray to Buddha, that once Buddha achieved nirvana, it's like for us, he's effectively disappeared, but that doesn't mean that necessarily he has no existence whatsoever. I mean, after all, the fourth seal of Buddhism is that nirvana is peace. And I think that the notion that's, in the sutras is that we can approach that kind of peacefulness at very deep meditative levels, which is sort of similar to what you might experience nirvana. But to even talk about what nirvana is like, it's completely separate from samsara. So I've always understood that, maybe we sever our samsaric consciousness, but that doesn't mean that we're just completely puffed out, just don't exist at all.
You're mixing a very enlightened attitude and understanding with what the tenets are of the lower school, some of the lower schools. So generally, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika say that when one achieves nirvana without remainder, that means one has passed beyond, one has died, one has achieved nirvana while alive. So that's called, from their point of view, that's called nirvana with remainder of the contaminated aggregates. and then when you die, your mind stream is severed according to them, although that seems uncomfortable to us, and it seems uncomfortable to you because you have more enlightened understanding, say the Mahayana. They say that the Buddha does not no longer, the Buddha is not reborn after that, and that is generally accepted to be the tenets of the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika. The only one that continues from some Sautrantikas would say that I think generally they would say that when the Buddha achieves parinirvana, that means nirvana without remainder of the contaminated aggregates, that the Buddha's mind no longer exists also. But his wishes that his prayers and aspirations and so forth that he created while living still have some power. They say that in the same way that some rishis, you know what rishis are? People whose speech was so, they were so careful in their speech. They always told the truth and very strict in their practice, that even when they die, their prayers, their wishes somehow have some efficacy to continue. But generally they don't accept that the Buddha exists after parinirvana, the lower schools like that. So here, the Chittamatra is beginning to open up the possibility, especially when we talk about, well, even in some of the Chittamatrans say that when you achieve the Hinayana, if you're of definite lineage and you achieve the Hinayana arhatship, your mind ceases. Some Chittamatrans say that your mind does not cease, but that those that accept the one final vehicle, that it resides in this hypothetical place that you were talking about, where the mind is still existing and that they are awakened after some time. So we'll address those again in other context, but I think maybe that's enough for that right now. So we have to keep on going, finish up our mind only. So where was I had a mark here somewhere where we reached last time. So the pages look very short here, but the details are excruciating. So I have on page 17 in Svensson's attempted translation here. I'm not sure what it is in Sanghya Khandro's. We just finished that first sentence there. Conventional truths that are included in imputational constructs and uncompounded phenomena other than ultimate truths are equivalent. So you have to think about that. So then continuing, all things are accepted to be the common locus of being truly established and being a falsity. Whoa. When we're talking about truly established, generally this is translated as truly existing. They do have a slightly different interpretation in the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, but generally we could say here, we're talking about Chittamatra, all things are accepted to be the common locus of being truly existent, yet being false. Do you know what does that mean? Anyone want to make a stab at what that means? Okay, Rowena.
I wonder, does it mean that because they're personally engaged, they cannot have a larger meaning? You're engaged in a very personal view. Something is not related to other people's reality. In other words, it's not established in any real way. It's just temporary.
clouded by defilements.
Yeah, it's you can't see something clearly enough yourself. Thank you, Donnie. You can't see something by yourself as it is, so that it's going to be erroneous anyway.
Well, maybe that's, I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean, but I think that's more or less. Falsity here, when we talk about true and false in the Mahayana, we start to talk about this. Something is true if it exists the way that it appears. So the Dalai Lama in teaching Majjhimaka, the key to the middle way, he mentions, like say, if your neighbor has the appearance of being your friend and smiling, but every day, every night, he's moving the fence onto your property, so his property is becoming larger and yours is becoming smaller. So that is a falsity. Their appearance of being your friend or, someone who's supporting you is false. From the Prasangika point of view, truth is that which is true is that which exists the way that it appears. So here, I think we have something similar. The way things are appearing, objects and so forth, is that they are separate entities from the consciousness that are perceiving them. They appear to be an external reality, but they are actually, that is false. So that appearance is false. So they are falsities, but they still truly exist. They are existing as how to say, real phenomena, not in the sense of being true. They appear to be external, but they are lacking that, but nonetheless, they really exist. All things are accepted to be a common locus of being truly established or truly existent and being false. All final realities, so final realities means emptiness, right? All final realities are accepted to be the common locus of being truly established, say truly existent, and being true. Because so also in the Prasangika and the Majjhimaka, we say that the only thing that is true is the appearance of is emptiness, because the way it exists is in accordance, is harmonious with the way it appears. It appears to be devoid of inherent existence, and it is devoid of inherent existence. So here, similar kind of thing. The final reality or emptiness of duality appears to be empty of duality and is empty of duality. Whereas other things appear to be dual, that is separate from the mind, but are not, so they're false. Okay, does it make sense? Bob, what do you think? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also this notion of being true. There seems to be this dichotomy between being true and being imputed by thought. So one notion that things are true, if the thing actually exists as it is, then things look like they don't have anything to do with us conceiving of them. And so if they're not imputed by thought, then I think that they say that they're true. But I mean, it's a little bit weird because the Chittamatrans seem to say that things are false in that they are not, they appear to be external, but they're not. But other than that, they are truly established.
Yeah, it seems,
which is a very weird thing. So they say they're truly established, but they admit at the same time that they are false and that they are external the way they appear.
Right. So even in Majjhimaka, we say that even valid cognizers, so that valid sense perception is still deceived with respect to the appearance of being inherently existent. Still can be valid, but with respect to what is being perceived. But it still is a falsity because it appears to be inherently existent. So I think somewhat similar there. Okay, so final realities are necessarily non-affirming negations or negatives. Illustrations of other non-affirming negations are similar to those of the Sautrantikas. So what does that mean? Generally, in the what do we say? Final realities. Final reality means emptiness, right? So generally, in the Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, one cannot perceive emptiness directly. That selflessness, one doesn't perceive it directly. You perceive it with a direct perceiver. That is, that you realize that the aggregates are empty of being a self-supporting person, or they're empty of being permanent, and implicitly, indirectly, you know that selflessness. Here, emptiness is this lack of duality between subject and object, we can say in general. And this is a non-affirming negation, which is can be realized directly. From the Madhyamaka point of view, it's possible to know, well, it'll come in the next section when we talk about object possessors. It's possible to know with direct perception, yogic direct perception, a non-affirming negation. Nothing is affirmed. It's just the lack of duality. Final realities are necessarily non-affirming negations. Illustrations of other non-affirming negations are similar to those of the Sautrantikas. We talked about that before. The 5 sense objects. Oh wait, Donnie has a question. Patiently holding her hand up.
Can I read what the Cosworth says about it? Non-affirming?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, I found it easy to understand. A non-affirming negative is something that is a mere absence, not implying anything positive. For instance, non-existence of a round square does not imply the existence of a square, just that there is no such thing as a round one. And then it goes on to say treeless plain. That's affirming negative because it's the opposite of non-affirming. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, well, we actually talked about that before. I don't know that Buddhism has the example of a square circle or a round square, but maybe that's his own explanation of it. We did talk about, so the 2 kinds of negations. Affirming negations, if we need to be refreshed, means that in negating something, you affirm something in its place, like the fat Devadatta who does not eat during the day. Is that a non-affirming negation or an affirming negation? It's an affirming negation because if Devadatta is fat, he's got to eat sometime, so he must eat at night. So there can be implicit and explicit affirming negations. A non-affirming negation is just saying, like say, for instance, you've searched, you think that you've lost your silverware, and you have a suspicion that the person in your house, the maid or butler or whatever, is stealing it. You've searched everywhere in their rooms, and you've realized that there is no burglar, there's no one that's been stealing it. At that point, that's just a non-affirming negation. There is no thief. So nothing is affirmed in that. It's just negated that there is a thief. Maybe that's an example of a non-affirming negation, sort of common sense, like his round, square, whatever. Stephen, you have a question.
Yeah, Venerable George. So we're saying that final realities are necessarily non-affirming negations. Is the opposite true? So are all non-affirming negations emptinesses or final realities?
No, the absence of duality between subject and object doesn't affirm anything. It just negates that. That is a non-affirming negation. Other non-affirming negations are not the lack of duality. So they are not emptinesses. Not all non-affirming negation. Also in Madhyamaka, not all non-affirming negations are emptinesses. Emptiness means, say, like in Prajnanika, the lack of inherent existence of the object or the subject that you're concerning. You know, the fact that it lacks inherent existence. It doesn't affirm any other kind of existence in its place. But other kinds of non-affirming negations that negate other things are not called emptiness. Like that, okay? The five sense objects, forms and so forth. So what does that mean, 5 sense objects? It just means the objects of eye sense, so those are visual forms and colors. What do we say, shape and color? The objects of eye consciousness are shapes and colors. It doesn't perceive anything other than that. Everything else that the eye picks up and the mind ruminates about, like, oh, that's beautiful, that's done by your mental consciousness. The eye consciousness does not perceive beauty and these other qualities. Ear consciousness perceives sounds, nose consciousness perceives odors, smells, tongue consciousness tastes, and tactile sensation, tangible objects, which include soft and rough and hot and cold, so forth. The 5 sense objects, forms and so forth, visual forms, are produced on the basis of a substance that is an inner consciousness in dependence upon the latencies of common and uncommon actions deposited upon the mind basis of all. They are not established as external objects. So that paragraph is sort of like one of the important statements of the Madhyamaka, the Chittamatra school, mind-only school. So the existence of objects of the 5 senses, they arise because of imprints put on one particular consciousness. In this case, it almost seems that Jason Chukyi Gelson is saying all of the Chittamatrans except the Alaya Vijnana. Have you heard it? We talked about that before, Alaya Vijnana, the foundation consciousness. We just mentioned it a couple minutes ago, right? Not all of the Chittamatrans accept the existence of that. Those that accept the existence of the Alaya Vijnana, usually we talk about 6 consciousnesses, right? The 5 senses, gross senses, bodily senses, eyes, ear, nose, and such, and the 6th sense, the mental consciousness, right? Usually we talk about 6 consciousnesses. Those that accept the Alaya Vijnana propose that there are 8 consciousnesses in total. In addition to the 6, they say they still have the 6, but they add the Alaya Vijnana, the foundation consciousness, and the what's called afflicted consciousness. Afflicted consciousness looks at its only job is looks at the Alaya Vijnana and thinks that it is a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So that's afflicted consciousness is the one that the arhats and so forth would, through their realization of selflessness, would eradicate. So here it's saying that independence on latencies of common and uncommon actions. So this gets back to a question that Bob had raised before. The Chittamatrans do accept that there are common and uncommon actions. Uncommon actions means individual karma that you create. Common actions means that karma that you create along with others. So Bob had raised the question before, how can that be? How can you have common actions if there are no external beings? So anyway, they kind of paper over that a little bit. Somehow they do accept that there are actions that are created in karma, in common, and those actions are what the latencies of which, the seeds of which upon your consciousness give rise to the appearance of the vessel world, the environment that you share with other beings. So the five sense objects, visual forms and so forth, when it says forms, here it means visual forms, the objects of eye, objects of ear and so forth, are produced on the basis of a substance that is an inner consciousness in dependence upon the latencies of common and uncommon actions, karma, deposited upon the mind basis of all. They are not established, they do not exist as external objects. They just look that way. So we talked about this in other guises. Tenzin Jancho, do you have a question?
Yes, so here, my question has to do with this, the use of this word substance in the ground of what the Chitta mantras call consciousness or mind only. And I struggle with this. So because my understanding is that if you're talking about a consciousness or an inner consciousness, how can it have a substance? I could understand how it might have a latency or a propensity as a seed, but I don't understand how they can use this word like a substance, because to me, a substance refers to something that may be a form or some kind of gross substance, right? And I can't make any sense of this in the understanding it from mind-only perspective.
Right? So I was trying to find this morning the Tibetan for this, and I was unsuccessful. Oh, maybe it's here. Okay, I found it.
I was hoping you were going to say
I was trying to look that up myself. So, oh, maybe I don't have all those pages. So we're talking about here, what section is this? 4, right? So, no, I don't. I was searching for what the word that is translated here is substance. In Sanghi Khandro's translation, what is translated right there? Do you have hers, Bob?
Yeah, she also uses the word substance also. She says that she says that the 5 sense objects, form, etc., arise from the substance of inner consciousnesses, independence, and so on. So she also
right from the substance of inner consciousness. So
yeah,
that's different. So it says the substance that is an inner consciousness. So it's just saying that inner consciousness is substance. It doesn't mean that it is substantially existent. It just means that generally the word substance has a plethora of meanings. You can see in the various texts. We here say that consciousness is also a substance. We talk about form and so forth as substance. And we also talk about consciousness as being substance. That's the main point here. So she said, the substance of consciousness. Here he's translated it, the substance that is an inner consciousness. So it's just saying that consciousness is a substance. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, could that be, when I say substance, could that be a synonym with being truly established? That the consciousness is truly, because I believe that the Chittamatrans say that the consciousness is truly established.
Right. All of these things are, it says, all things are accepted to be the common locus of being truly established, truly existent, and being false, right? So they're all phenomena, all things, that means impermanent things. When we talk about things, that means things that are compounded phenomena. Consciousness is compounded phenomena. So it is truly existent. But but it is, when we talk about these things that have a continuity in time, we talk about not just because they're permanent, having a continuity, but things that are impermanent that have a continuity, they are said to be substantial. So, Tenzin, does that help at all?
I think so, but you also just mentioned truly exist. I think you said truly existent.
Yes.
Do you mean truly established? Because in my mind, truly established is very different from being truly existent. So I mean, I can understand, like, if phenomena are impermanent and there is an aggregation of an impermanent phenomena that's apparent for some time, I can understand. My mind easily says, okay, that's a truly established phenomena. But when you use the word truly existent, my mind always goes to the wrong concept of things being truly existent in a grasping mind. So
well, we only get to the negation of true existence when we get to the Madhyamaka school. These schools, even though the Chittamatra now talks about emptiness and talks about some other Mahayana concepts, sort of introducing them to us, it's still talking about phenomena being truly existent, truly established. It's only when you get to the Madhyamaka, which says that phenomena are empty of being truly existent. So generally, things have a certain mode of existing and mode of appearance. They are truly existent and they have a mode of appearing for Chittamatra, but they have a mode of appearing as being external, which is false. So this is a little bit what we were talking about before. You still have your hand up. Is that okay?
oh yes, thank you.
I'll try to elaborate about that a little bit more as we go along. According to the true aspectarians, next paragraph, even though the 5 sense objects, forms and so forth, are not external objects, they are accepted to exist as gross objects. I think we talked about this before, right? In the definition of true aspectarians. According to the false aspectarians, the 5 sense objects, forms, and so forth are not gross objects, because if they were gross objects, they would necessarily be external objects. So this gets into a very complicated subject. Those of you who are, I think, maybe Tenzin's asked some of these kind of deep questions, and Bob and Donnie reading other things. If you want to know a little bit more about this, the basis of this kind of discussion about gross objects, and you have the wherewithal, George Dreyfus's book, Recognizing Reality, is a good source. So I wanted to read a little bit from here about this kind of thing. Generally, Dharmakirti talked about generalities, things that are generally established are, intellectual constructs, right? We talked about specifically characterized phenomena before and generally characterized phenomena in the Sautrantika. Remember, generally characterized phenomena are sort of considered to be lesser kind of reality. Specifically characterized phenomena are the objects of the sense powers. So you can see an individual cow, but you can't see the generality cow. Generality cow is something that your mind, your mental consciousness constructs, and the appearance of that to conception is how you think about cow, right? Generally characterized phenomena. So generally, Dharmakirti was leaning in that direction, that generalities are not perceivable. They're not common sense objects. Let me see here. Universal, generalities, okay? Generalities or universals, as George Dreyfus, if you start on page 107,
Okay.
about 3/4 of the way down the page. Universals subsume logically their particulars. So universal or generality is like a set, and it has individual elements, right? They subsume or include their particulars. So that's generally how we translate generality in particular, or you could say, instead of generality, you can say universal in particular. Universals subsume logically their particulars because the particulars instantiate them. They are instances of them, right? They're particulars of them. Coarse objects, so this is where it comes in. We're talking about this argument between the true aspectarians, false aspectarians. One of the major points is the discussion of coarse or gross objects. So generally what you're seeing, Dharmakirti would argue, are just particulars. So gross objects, which are a collection or a collection of individuals, there's a doubt about whether they're only intellectually constructed or whether they are something that you actually perceive. Coarse objects, excuse me. Coarse objects and continua, continues, plural of continuum, right? I say continuums, if you want. That is, Bob is not the same. The Bob right now is not the same as the Bob that was first named after birth. I assume Bob's been your first name and only name, right? So, but we can talk about Bob, the continuum of Bob during this lifetime. There was not a continuum of that before this life. There won't be a continuum of, quote, Bob after this lifetime. There'll be a continuum of his consciousness, but that continuum is a collection of instants, right? Any one instant of which is impermanent. But while Bob is existing, we can say, although Bob is impermanent, generally there's a gross object, a collection or a universal generality Bob, which we can say only changes when he dies. That comes a little bit later here. So this is interesting for those that want to delve into this more. coarse objects and continua materially subsume their parts. So the parts of the continuum of Bob, or our own consciousness, are the individual instance. Subsuming them, that means they include them, right? Coarse objects and continua materially subsume their parts because they are composed of those parts. I'll just read a couple of other paragraphs here. A little further on, Tibetan thinkers distinguish collection universals. Those of you who are studying Tibetan, Sokchi. So chi means generality or collection. Chi and chetak. Chi means generality. Chetak means particular, like Chetamawa is the Tibetan word for the particularists, the Vaibhashikas. They talk about particulars. So Tibetan thinkers distinguish between collection universals, Sokchi, that means a generality which is a collection of parts, and kind universals, Rikchi. Rik means family or kind. Lama Zopa Rinpoche nowadays doesn't like to translate Rik as family, like in Tibetan we say Rikipu means son of the lineage, son of the family. Usually we always translate. Rinpoche wants to say son of the kind, or something like that, because the meaning comes in from this kind of argument. Kind universals and object universals, Dunshi, which we call mental images. The last two are mostly genuine universals. The first one meaning this kind of consideration of a gross object and a continuum. The first one, this kind of what we're talking about now, gross objects and continua, is not considered to be a genuine universal by many epistemologists. Gelugpa thinkers consider this typology of universal or generality to be metaphorical or terminological, because collective universals are not real universals. So they're not only just objects of mental conception from one point of view, they have a certain kind, gross objects and continua have a certain kind of reality of their own. There were a couple other paragraphs I wanted to mention, but you can, in that little section, starting around page 105, 106, Gelugpa thinkers on specific ontology. You can find some more explanation of this. So according to true aspectarians, even though the five sense objects, visual form and so forth, are not external objects, they are accepted to exist as gross objects. That's why they're called, the appearance of being a gross object is true for them. The false aspectarians are the ones that would say they are still generalities. Gross objects are generalities, and so they're false. They also agree that the appearance of being external is false, but they further say the appearance of being a gross object is false. So to really understand that, you have to go back to the origins of how these terms came about when we talk about generalities or universals and their instances, the particulars. Okay. Then we get to, I'll leave Mickey Mouse up there. Now we get to the subjects, ways of asserting object possessors. True aspectarians accept a collection of 8 consciousnesses. So generally, according to Jason Chucky Gelson's analysis, the true aspectarians generally accept 8 consciousnesses because they assert that in addition to this collection of the 6 consciousnesses accepted by other proponents of tenets, there are a mind basis of all, an alaya vijnana, and the afflicted mentality, which makes a total of 8. So you have the same 6 consciousnesses that we generally accept in Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, and which the Madhyamaka generally accepts, with some exception. The Yogacara, Svatantrika, Madhyamikas also accept 8. 8 consciousness. There are illustrations of both a mind basis of all and an afflicted mentality. They exist, there are examples. The consciousness that is an object different from the collection of 6 consciousnesses, so something other than the 6 consciousnesses that does not depend on a sense power. Even the mental consciousness depends on the mental sense power, right? Which is the previous moment of consciousness. The consciousness that does not depend on a sense power that, which is its own empowering condition, is asserted to be the mind basis of all. So the mind basis of all, one of its qualities is that's the receptacle of all of the karmic imprints from which our experience of the inner world, our own subjective experience, and the outer, what appears to be the outer world, they all arise from imprints on that. The consciousness that observes the alaya vijnana, the mind basis of all, which is its observed object, and apprehends it in the aspect of being a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, me, is asserted to be the afflicted mentality. The mind basis of all is asserted to be an illustration of the person that is the support of action, the support of actions and their results. So for the true, according to Jason Trukey Gelson's analysis here, some other people may see it a little bit differently, but he generally says that the true aspectarians accept the 8 consciousnesses, and that another quality or factor of the alaya vijnana is an example or an illustration of the person. We talked about this before. If you looked for in the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, you could always find, even though the person is imputed upon the 5 aggregates, there was something you could find there in the end, which was an illustration of the person. It might have been the collection of the 5 aggregates or the mental consciousness. But here, the Chittamatras say the illustration of the person that you can find is the alaya vijnana. The mind basis of all is asserted to be an illustration of the person that is the support of actions and their results. So actions and results are made by the person, and the person can be found. There's an illustration of it that can be found all the way through all of the schools, other than the Prasangika Madhyamaka. All of them say that there is something you can find finally as the illustration of the person, or objects. When you talk about emptiness, there is something that you can find which is the illustration of the object, except for Prasangika says there is nothing that you can find. There's no illustration of the person. It's because of their particular understanding of emptiness. Okay, how are we doing? False aspectarians assert a collection of 6 consciousnesses, at least according to our author here, Jason Trukey Gelson, and posit the mere mental consciousness to be an illustration of the person that is the support of actions and their results. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can check back, I think the false aspectarians are generally followers of reasoning, meaning followers of Dharmakirti's 7 treatises and Dignaga, And the followers of scripture for the Chittamatra are the followers of a Sangha's texts. So a Sangha is renowned to be the founder of the mind only, and that there is no external reality out there, and talks about these 8 consciousnesses because the seeds reside upon the alaya vijnana. Okay, so then the proponents of mind only, Chittamatra, asserts 2 types of awareness: valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. So again, as we talked about in other cases, the presentation of these subsets of sub-illustrations of different states of mind can be organized in a different way. Here he starts out, as he did before, with valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. And they assert 2 types of valid cognizers: direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. Direct valid cognizer means generally the 5 senses, but also some mental experiences of that. But most of our mental valid cognizers are inferential, that are due to having understood a reasoning and deduced the existence of a hidden phenomena. There are 4 types of direct perceivers. Now he's gone from valid cognizers, and he's talked about subsection direct and inferential. Now he's just talking about direct perceivers in general that don't necessarily have to be valid, right? There are 4 types of direct perceivers, things that are known directly: self-knowing, self-cognizing, what we call rangrik, direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers. Those 2 are necessarily non-mistaken. The self-cognizing that just knows the mere entity of the consciousness that it is knowing. It doesn't know any other objects. It just knows it has the aspect of a apprehender. That is, what it's knowing is not apprehended objects, but it's knowing something internal. It's knowing the nature of consciousness. And yogic direct perceivers are necessarily non-mistaken because of the quality of that consciousness. It's knowing its object in a non-mistaken way. A sense direct perceiver in the continuum of an ordinary being is necessarily a mistaken consciousness. Do you remember what we meant by that? A direct sense perceiver in the continuum of an ordinary being is necessarily a mistaken consciousness. What did the Sautrantikas say? A direct perceiver, is it mistaken? It's not mistaken, right? Because it's perceiving its object, which is an external phenomena. It's not mistaken with respect to that. Here, they say that a sense direct perceiver in the continuum of an ordinary being is necessarily mistaken, is a mistaken consciousness. How is it mistaken? Because it perceives that object to be external to the mind that's perceiving it, whereas it is not external. It perceives it in a dualistic fashion. The meaning of dualism in Chittamatra means the dualism, the 2 things that are being counterpoised here is the subject consciousness and the object. It perceives the objects in a dualistic fashion as though they were separate from the consciousness. So that's, from Chittamatra point of view, that's a mistake. Big mistake, right? A sense direct perceiver in the continuum of an ordinary being is necessarily a mistaken consciousness. A mental direct perceiver in the continuum of an ordinary being can either be a mistaken consciousness or a non-mistaken consciousness. So it's saying that sense direct perceivers are necessarily mistaken. Mental direct perceiver, so mental, even though yogic direct perceiver is based on the mental consciousness, it's not called a mental direct perceiver. So that was necessarily non-mistaken. Mental direct perceivers in the continuum of ordinary beings can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. So there is some mental direct perceivers in the continua of ordinary beings. I'll put the plural of both. Continuum of an ordinary being, continua of ordinary beings can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. So generally, the mental direct perceiver is one that lasts only an instant. You know, it's a mental direct perceiver, an ordinary being, knows sense objects. We see something. The first instant we see something with our eye consciousness, the mental consciousness perceives that directly, but it only lasts an instant. So I would assume that means that that's an example of, an example of mistaken, because it says can be either mistaken consciousness or non-mistaken, because the eye consciousness is perceiving, let's say the tree perceives it as an external object, and the mental consciousness, the mental direct perceiver that has one instant of that arising and then doesn't continue, that is also perceiving that object as external to the mind. So that would be mistaken. I don't recall here, I'll have to check for our next class, what an example of a non-mistaken mental direct perceiver is for Chittamatra. Bob, do you know?
I don't know for them, but usually the other category that other people talk about is, for example, directly seeing, sort of these miracle-like powers, seeing another person's mind directly or something like that. So maybe that's what they mean. I don't know, but I forget what they mean for Chittamatra.
Or hearing it from a superior whose lineage is trusted and sure, like hearing it from Shariputra.
Say that again, Donnie? That was Donnie, right?
Yeah, hearing it from a superior whose true lineage is recognized, like Shariputra or.
Right, but what does that have to do with a mental direct perceiver?
Well, you're perceiving.
Hearing is not a mental direct perceiver, right?
Yeah, you're perceiving directly through your mentation the words of the Buddha.
Oh, I see.
That's expressed by, that's actually in one of these books. I saw it this morning.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. I have to think about that. That sounds quite possible. So what Donnie is saying is that another text is saying that when you hear, let's say the Buddha speaking, or you said Shariputra or something like that, Arya being, that the mental direct perceiver that lasts just an instant would not be mistaken, would be non-mistaken. Generally, mistaken means here generally means with respect to being an external object. That would still seem to be an external object, so I'm not quite sure about that. Donna, you send me an email with the reference of that text, page number, and I'll check it out later. Okay.
Okay.
Not right now, okay? Next paragraph, a direct perceiver is not necessarily a direct valid cognizer, because although there exists a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being, there does not exist a mental direct valid cognizer apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being. I'll elaborate on these next. I just want to read these now, get closer to the end and elaborate next time. a self-knowing and self-knower, self-cognizing awareness, experiencing a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being, and the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form are non-valid cognizers. Okay, complicated. So we've reached the end of the 10 stages. We've reached the end of the class, I think. Oh no, we still have half an hour? Oh, we still have an half hour. Okay, good. I just taught yesterday the class that lasted an hour and a half. So it's the last time I shortchanged you. So Donnie was proposing an example of a non-mistaken mental direct perceiver, but I'd like to see that. Bob, is that what you're checking right now? No, you're sitting.
I'm looking at it right now. I put in the chat. I'll have to find, it's that new and incontrovertible. Only those. There's not very many. It's just people who hear the.
No,
Buddha.
you're talking about Dharmakirti, right? You're not talking about Chittamatra. We're talking about Chittamatra here.
That's what I was reading.
Okay. So there is a section in the book that you're talking about that is talking about Chittamatra, because it says recognizing reality. That's George Dreyfus's book. Right?
Well, are you looking in the text?
I'm looking at your chat.
Yeah, that's it.
So what page is that in George Dreyfus's book?
Oh, I'll have to look. I'll send you the email.
Okay, I thought because you quoted that, I thought you had the page number there. Okay.
No, this is another thing from online.
Yes, but that it says recognizing reality. That's the book by George Dreyfus. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay. So let's continue then. We've got a little more time. So a self-knower experiencing a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being is a non-valid cognizer. Also, the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form are non-valid. So the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form is non-valid because it's not fresh, right? But what about this self-knower experiencing a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being? Why is that not a valid cognizer? Anyone have an idea?
Because it's based on the faulty senses.
A self-knower, but a self-knower doesn't apprehend the object of the senses, right? It's only apprehending the entity of the mental consciousness.
Yeah.
Self-knower experiencing a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being. So I will make a note there to check on that also. That's a little bit problematic. Some of the different presentations of tenets emphasize certain obscure facts for you to debate about as a means of delving into the subject more deeply. I think, again, Donnie had mentioned, wanted me to elaborate a little bit about the sequential nature of the Buddhist tenets. That is to say, I've mentioned this before at the beginning, it's not as though the higher schools consider the Vaibhashika to be wrong or the Sautrantaka to be wrong in the sense of, to be discarded and not necessarily to think about. They understand them as like steps, like on a staircase. If you want to get from the first floor up to the second floor, you have to walk up the stairs or the ladder, whatever you are using. So they sometimes, they're like rungs of a ladder or steps on a staircase. By investigating them and understanding their position, that has a certain logical consistency from that point of view, you are then in a position to understand the next set of tenets that's slightly higher, more sophisticated, that refute those ideas. And investigating the subject of the various philosophical schools in that way, one develops a deeper understanding of the meaning of the tenets. If you go just directly to Prasangika Madhyamaka and you try to understand those tenets, that may very, very difficult to understand their position until you've understood the position they're refuting and the position, say the Svatantrika Madhyamikas, and the position that they refute, the Chittamatra, that says that things are truly existing, and the position that the Chittamatra refutes about the Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. So they're all seen as valid and important steps in understanding the final view. So here, let's go a little bit further. There are 4 types of yogic direct perceivers. Yogic direct perceivers directly realizing subtle impermanence. We talked about that before for the Sautrantikas. Yogic direct perceivers directly realizing the subtle selflessness of persons, those that realize the coarse selflessness of persons, and those yogic direct perceivers directly realizing the selflessness of phenomena. So what's different in this list than for the Sautrantikas? When we talked about yogic direct perceivers. Yogic direct perceivers for the Sautrantikas, they didn't talk about realizing emptiness, because emptiness refers to objects other than persons, right? When we talk about selflessness, we talk about the selflessness of persons generally in the lower schools. We don't talk about the selflessness of phenomena other than in a sort of tangential way that my iPad here is selfless in the sense that it is not the object of use or enjoyment by a self-supporting, substantially existent person. They don't look at the object itself and say that it is selfless. Is that okay, Bob? Okay. So for the Prasangika Madhyamaka schools, we talk about, and here in the Chittamatra, now we're talking about the Mahayana. So we talk about the emptiness of phenomena also, not just the emptiness of the person. Generally, the Hinayana schools don't talk about emptiness of the person using the word emptiness. They talk about the person is empty. The selflessness of persons is a person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. They don't call that selflessness of persons emptiness of persons. They use the word selfless. And they only tangentially, some of them tangentially talk about the selflessness of phenomena, but it's only in regard to not being objects of use by a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So they're mainly talking about the selflessness of persons. In the Mahayana, we now use the word emptiness in general to include that. We talk about the emptiness of persons and the emptiness of phenomena other than persons. So we can say, when we say emptiness of phenomena, it just says emptiness of phenomena. It doesn't say the emptiness of phenomena other than persons, but that's what it means. That's what phenomena in that context only refers to phenomena other than persons. So the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena are called the emptiness of persons and the emptiness of phenomena. So this term emptiness now comes in the Chittamatra when we talk about yogic direct perceivers directly realizing the selflessness of phenomena, or in other words, the emptiness of phenomena, being empty of being dualistic, right? In the sense that the consciousness that's realizing it and the object are actually the same nature. So they just had the first three: yogic direct perceivers that realize subtle impermanence. Do you need a yogic direct perceiver to realize gross impermanence? No,
No.
you can see with your eye, right? Or hear with your ear. The things are changing moment by moment. That things change grossly. Yogic direct perceivers directly realizing subtle selflessness of persons, which for them is the lack of being self-supporting, substantially existent person, and the coarse selflessness of persons, the lack of being permanent, partless, and independent. So here the Chittamatras add the yogic direct perceivers directly realizing selflessness of phenomena. An inferential valid cognizer is necessarily conceptual, right? What does that mean? That means within that consciousness, it's not a direct perceiver, it's something that you are knowing by means of conceptual mind, by means of analyzing a logical argument. You come to a conclusion, you realize that there is no, that fire exists in the distance because of seeing billowing smoke, even though you don't see the fire. Maybe it's in a container, you know, like a walled brick or stone wall within which the shepherds have thrown refuse, grass, and sheep dung or cow dung or yak dung. They lit a fire. You don't see the fire flame directly, but you can infer the existence of fire by the existence of billowing smoke. You might have the doubt whether you can infer that because it might be fog or something, but it's talking about you actually, perhaps you, as the wind blows, the smoke comes toward you and you can smell that it's smoke. It's not just fog or something like that. So an inferential valid cognizer is necessarily conceptual. If it is an inferential cognizer with respect to a phenomenon, it is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon. Sounds contradictory, right? It says that an inferential cognizer is necessarily conceptual. It's being done with the mental consciousness, which deals with mental images. It is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon, because although the inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer with respect to sound being empty of being permanent. Nadine, are you following? You see me? Jeremy, you listening? Okay. Here, what we're talking about almost sounds like word games. Although an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, that is necessarily conceptual. Okay, because the first sentence said an inferential valid cognizer is necessarily conceptual. An inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer with respect to sound being empty of being permanent. Is empty of being permanent the same as realizing something to be empty of being permanent? Is that the same as realizing that it is impermanent? Empty of being permanent.
No, it's not the same.
Well, if you realize that sound is impermanent, do you realize that it is empty of being permanent?
Well, when you
It
put it
is
that
not
way, yeah.
permanent, right? you do realize that, but you don't realize it. You don't realize the if you realize that. What does it say here? Inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent. That's what you've realized. Okay. Getting lost in the lines here. Although inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer with respect to being empty of being permanent, you realize that indirectly. It is not a conception with respect to that, because you are not conceiving, you don't have a mental image of it being empty of being permanent. Your mental image is that it is impermanent, not permanent. Impermanent is momentary, changing moment by moment. You realize indirectly that it is empty of being permanent, or implicitly, so that is not, what does it say here? If it is an inferential cognizer with respect to a phenomena, that means impermanence, it is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon. So it is not a conception of being empty of being permanent. This is so because if it is a conception with respect to a phenomenon, the aspect of that phenomenon necessarily arises. So you have a mental image of that. And with respect to an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, the aspect of sound being empty of being permanent does not arise. So you don't have a mental image of it being empty of being permanent. Rowena's nodding. Did you get that? Yeah, okay, that's enough. You didn't have to unmute, you can just, yeah. Therefore, that inferential cognizer does not explicitly realize sound to be empty of being permanent. It realizes that implicitly or indirectly when it explicitly realizes sound to be impermanent. We talked a little bit about this in the Sautrantika when we said, when you have a direct realization of selflessness for Sautrantika, what you are directly realizing is that the aggregates are empty of being, let's say, permanent. And implicitly, you are realizing, therefore, that the person is empty of being permanent, partless, and independent. Tenzin Jiangzhu, your hand is raised. Your hand is different color than Danny's. Danny's hand was yellow. It was raised. You have different emojis there.
Different karma, maybe.
Different karma, yeah.
Different
Lynn
appearance,
incorporated
different
them.
false appearances.
Mhm.
So my question is this the same in Sautrantika to this paragraph in Mind Only, or are there differences?
My first, without even thinking about it, my first thought is that it would be the same, that you don't, unless the aspect, the mental image is arising of something, that you don't have a conception of that. So it is you've realized something with an inferential cognizer that sound is impermanent. When we say impermanent, you might say that that's the same as being empty of permanent, because in English, impermanent, im is like a negating particle. Also in Tibetan, we say mitakpa. Mi means not, takpa means permanent, so not permanent. But that takpa mayinpa,
I think he's not here anymore.
Yeah, I think we have a slight delay in transmission.
Whatever Tom Mayimpa meant, it certainly had an impact.